IO9 presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here are your hosts, John Joseph Adams and David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 33 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Hi, this is John Joseph Adams. I'm the editor of Lightspeed Magazine and Fantasy Magazine and several anthologies, such as Brave New Worlds, which is all about dystopian fiction, which is the subject of this episode.
And I'm David Barr Kirtley. I'm the author of many short stories, including The Skull-Faced Boy, which originally appeared on Gothic.net, and which was reprinted in John's zombie anthology The Living Dead. The story also appeared as episode 94 of the Pseudopod podcast. And today on the show, we'll be interviewing Cameron Stracher. He's a lawyer specializing in First Amendment litigation, and he teaches at New York Law School. He also attended the Iowa Writers' Workshop, and is the author of the books Dinner with Dad, How I Found My Way Back to the Family Table, and Double Billing, A Young Lawyer's Tale of Greed, Sex, Lies, and the Pursuit of a Swivel Chair. His latest book, The Water Wars, is a young adult novel about a dystopian future in which water is a scarce commodity.
Okay, so let's get to our interview.
All right, so we're here with Cameron Stracher. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so first of all, tell us about your new novel, Water Wars. What's it about?
Well, The Water Wars is a young adult novel. It's about a near-future world in which access to fresh water is limited and controlled by just a few governments and corporations. And there's this mysterious boy named Kai who comes onto the scene and seems to have some sort of special access to fresh water, and then he disappears. And a friend he meets, this girl Vera, and her brother Will have to find him.
So why did you decide to write about water scarcity?
Well, I think I started generally with the idea of wanting to write a young adult novel, and specifically wanting to write something dystopian. My son was 12 years old at the time and was just sort of beginning to read that kind of fiction, and I always have liked dystopian fiction. Even, when I was his age, that was the sort of stuff I read. And I wanted to write something for him, and something that he would enjoy, and that we could sort of read and work together. And so, dystopian, the whole dystopian genre sort of begins with the premise of, what's going on in our world now that in the near future could really get out of hand. And to me, one of the clearest examples or warnings is water and water scarcity. And so I just began to imagine a world not unlike our own, in which fresh water is very limited and very hard to find.
What kind of research did you have to do?
Well, I did a lot of reading. There's a lot of scientific stuff that's been written about water scarcity. A lot of sort of policy groups, and there are a number of nonprofits who have very good websites. So I scoured the internet and read a lot of material online. As I said, there are a couple good books. A book called Not One More Drop about water scarcities. There's some books about political instability and water scarcity. So that was the sort of stuff that I read.
Listening to interviews with you, I heard you talk about fossil aquifers. I mean, could you talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's something that a lot of people don't know that much about.
This is really where most of our fresh water comes from. People actually think of reservoirs, these big kind of basins filled with water, but in fact, most water sits below the surface in areas where the ground is rocky or loose, and it is just there in the water table. Lots of times you hear people talking about, the water tables are really high here, the water table is really low. And what they're really talking about is there's an aquifer below the dirt and the soil that we're in, and the aquifer is basically a kind of wet, loamy, rocky substance that holds fresh water, and we can suck it out, and we do suck it out to provide drinking water and all sorts of other stuff, in the same way that oil is sucked out from rock. The trouble is that aquifers only get replenished at a certain rate. They get replenished, when it rains and the water seeps into the ground, when rivers come down and the water seeps off the side. And it's actually quite a slow process. The water gets filtered as it goes through the ground, and that's what makes it drinkable. But it happens at a very slow rate. And the problem is, as cities and urban areas have gotten larger, the rate at which we take the water out of the aquifers far exceeds the rate at which it naturally falls back in. So all around the world, these aquifers are dropping or becoming polluted or poisoned because when they get too low, salt water seeps into them, and we're losing one of our main sources of fresh water that way.
There was just a Thomas Friedman column where he said that Yemen might be the first country to actually run out of water. Have you heard anything about that?
That wouldn't surprise me. Those countries, where there's not a lot of water to begin with, and then where industry and population growth have really taken off, they have really far outstripped their natural water resources. Yemen, that would strike me as a perfect place for it. I mean, Yemen is mostly a desert country, so they probably have limited water to begin with. And once a country gets industrial, that's when they use the most water. And that's actually the biggest concern. As India and China become more industrialized and more so-called first world countries, the rate of their water consumption drastically increases. Right now, I think it's something like the average person in India or China uses only 40 or 50 gallons of water a day, whereas in the United States, we use about 150 gallons of water a day. Now, of course, we're not drinking that water, all of it, but we're using it, for industry, for manufacturing, for irrigation. And again, the more industrial a country becomes, the more and the greater rate of its water consumption.
Is there anything people can do to see that our water supply is used more wisely?
Oh, sure. Lots of things. Just the other night, my wife was taking like a 40-minute shower upstairs. And now that I've written this book and I'm so conscious of these things, I'm just thinking to myself, do you know how much water is going down the drain, instead of being preserved? The difference between taking a 5-minute shower, which will get you perfectly clean, and a 40-minute shower, which is really just a luxury, is enormous. And if you multiply that by, 300 million people in the United States, 6 billion people across the world, you can see how tons of water is just, wasted unnecessarily. Other things like, our lawns, the fact that we are obsessed with having these green lawns, even in these desert climates. I was just out in Arizona doing some readings for my book, and it's amazing to see these expanses of green lawns, not just golf courses, but people's homes. And, this is an area that maybe gets 2 or 3 inches of water a year. And yet, everybody has this sense of entitlement that, we can turn the tap on and turn our desert into a green oasis, even though that's not the way, the world was made.
So how did you go from having the basic idea of this dystopian future world to the actual details of the characters and plot?
Yeah, that's a good question, and of course, that's really the main issue when you're writing any book. You can have the idea, but the question is always how you're gonna tell that story, how you're gonna make it interesting. For me, it really started with a kind of image of this boy Kai. I didn't know he was Kai at the time, but I do a lot. I like to run. I do a lot of jogging, and often sort of ideas and images come to me. And I was out running, and I just sort of had this image of this boy standing in the middle of a road. It was a dusty, dry road, and he was standing there, and he had half a cup of water in his hand, and he just kind of tipped the water over and spilled it into the dirt, and he did it in this way. It was kind of arrogant. It was kind of like he didn't care. It was an interesting sort of gesture. And because the idea of water scarcity was sort of gestating at that time, and I knew I wanted to write something about it, I realized that boy, that was the sort of kernel of the story there. Who was that boy? Why was he standing there in the road? Why was he spilling that water like it didn't matter? What was his story? What was his mystery? And, I began to realize that he was Kai. He had this mysterious access to water. For him, spilling water in a dry world didn't really mean very much. And the act of spilling was observed by this girl, Vera, who became the protagonist, who, basically had the same sort of thoughts I did, which was, who is this guy? Why is he doing this? What's going on? And in her quest to sort of learn more about him, that was the kernel of the story. And from there, everything kind of expanded.
Okay, so, Water Wars has blurbs by some pretty big names, including Justin Cronin and Laurie David, the producer of An Inconvenient Truth. I was wondering, just have you had any direct contact with any of those folks, or did your publisher handle all of that?
Actually, both Laurie and Justin were very nice. I got their emails through intermediaries and, queried them, sent them the book, and they were very generous. I mean, I don't know if you've had experience getting blurbs or trying to get blurbs. It can be a really humbling experience. You try to reach out to people and everybody's so busy and, it's hard. But they were both really pretty amazing about it.
So who are some of your favorite science fiction authors that inspired you?
Just because I read this book when I was a kid, I'm rereading the books by John Christopher, the Tripods trilogy. I don't know if you guys have ever read that book.
Yeah, no, I love those books.
Yeah, those are great books, and I had forgotten. I read them when I was about 10 or 12 years old. I've always loved Frank Herbert. I love Dune, although I thought the later books got kind of carried away. I love William Gibson. Love almost all of his stuff. As a kid, I read tons of Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein. Ray Bradbury is great. I love The Golden Compass. I think you'd think of that as science fiction. I read a lot of sort of young adult sci-fi now just because that's, I am writing it more and my son is interested in it. And so I just kind of gravitate to that. I really like John Twelvehawk's book, The Traveler. I tend to like books with sort of, dystopian, anti-government, dark kind of themes. I don't know what that says about me, but that's what I like.
Several movies have depicted futures in which water is scarce. Ice Pirates, Tank Girl, and The Book of Eli, to name a few. What do you think of the way that movies have dealt with the theme of water scarcity?
Yeah, I remember Tank Girl. I'd actually forgotten that Tank Girl was a movie that had a similar theme until a couple people on the Facebook page for Water Wars mentioned it. I actually really liked Tank Girl, and I like Lori Petty a lot too. I remember liking that movie. It's been a long time since I'd seen it. I haven't seen the other two, but the idea of some kind of material scarcity, even if it's not necessarily water, is common to a lot of sci-fi movies. Even movies like Mad Max. You think of Mad Max in that sort of desert environment. I mean, he needs gasoline, but you can't imagine he's drinking much water there either. Of course, then you've got the movies on the other side, like Waterworld, right, where there's nothing but water.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up Waterworld. I was going to say, given that Waterworld was one of the biggest flops in movie history, and yet it's kind of the opposite of your book in terms of the amount of water. So if they made a movie out of your book, can we assume then that it would be one of the biggest hits in movie history, just because of the transitive property of less water in movie equals more box office? Yeah. I'm not sure if that's makes sense or not.
I really hope so. And when I first was writing this book and I told people what I was writing the book about, they would say to me, "Oh, that's Waterworld," and I would say, "No, it's the exact opposite of Waterworld."
Has there been any sort of film interest or TV, anything like that?
People contact me about it and want to know if the rights are available and want to see copies, but nobody's written me a check yet. So until that happens, I'm not buying anything.
Okay, so you attended the Iowa Writers Workshop. I was just wondering, were any of the students there writing science fiction, and was anyone on the faculty knowledgeable about science fiction?
I think the short answer is no. The long answer is I think there probably were some closet sci-fi writers. The guy who wrote the screenplay for I, Robot, and I'm blanking on his name now. But
is that Akiva Goldsman?
No, not Akiva. Akiva may have directed it. I'm not sure if he also got a screenwriting credit. Jeff Vintner, is that possible? I forget.
Yeah, Jeff Vintner, that sounds right.
Jeff Vintner, yes, okay.
Yeah.
What a memory I have. He was a year behind me at Iowa, and I remember that he kind of was into sort of sci-fi and cartoons, comic book stuff. I think people thought he was a little weird because he, that was the sort of stuff he'd like to do. And, I never heard of him. And suddenly I was watching iRobot and then he resurfaced. But he's the only one I can think of. Although I suspect that there were a lot of people who, were secret sci-fi fans.
So your day job is as a media lawyer. What kind of cases do you handle?
I do a lot of libel and privacy cases. I do what's called pre-publication review for magazines and television shows. So, for example, if you've ever seen the reality television show Dog the Bounty Hunter, the producers are my clients. I'll watch the shows before they get finalized. I'll advise them about risks. I do the same for Star Magazine. Al Roker has a production company. I do the same for him. And then, God forbid if they get sued, I usually handle and litigate the lawsuits as well.
I mean, what would be an example of something like if you're watching Dog the Bounty Hunter, like what's something that might happen where you're like, oh, better make a note about that?
Well, you worry most obviously you worry about defamatory statements. If Dog were to say, I mean, he does say, this guy's wanted for attempted murder, you want to be sure that that's really correct, because if he's not wanted for attempted murder or it's some innocent guy who he's mistakenly identified, the guy's got a libel claim against the producers and against Dog. Now, we will carefully look at the records and, Dog knows what he's talking about. He's got a warrant for the guy's arrest. So, usually we're fine. But, that's the sort of stuff I keep an eye out for. Copyright and music stuff happens a lot too. Like they'll play a track of a song in the background and I'll remind them, hey, even if you've got a song in the background, you actually need to license it unless, you're using it very incidentally. So things like that.
Can you think of any like really strange or noteworthy cases that you've worked on?
Well, I'll tell you something. Right now, I'm actually defending Star Magazine against a $50 million lawsuit brought by Katie Holmes that was just filed yesterday. So that's kind of preoccupying me, let me say.
So actually, you're the third lawyer we've had on the show who's also a writer. I'm wondering, is that a day job you'd recommend to writers for some reason?
Yeah, I might. It's interesting. I think that a lot of lawyers are frustrated writers, and a lot of them are probably like me. I mean, I always wanted to be a writer. I wrote through college, and then, my parents said to me, go get a real job. And I was too scared to sort of go out and be a freelancer on my own. So I did. I went to law school, but, I kept writing and I always sort of came back to it. After law school, I left the practice of law, went to Iowa, got a master's, spent 4 years out there writing, but then came back to New York and practiced law again. Law has been a good profession for me because it's actually, despite its reputation of being like a place that eats its young, as you get older, you actually have sort of more flexibility and more ability to work part-time and, make your own hours. And if you're willing to, not be the richest lawyer in the world, you can have a lot of flexibility. So, I think it's two things. It's one, law attracts people who like to write. And then two, law actually can provide you to some extent with a little more financial freedom to pursue writing than, another job might.
I saw that you wrote a novel called Double Billing, which looks like is sort of an expose of the legal profession. I mean, what are some of the problems you see with the law, and is there anything that can be done about them?
Well, Double Billing is actually a memoir. It's based on my experiences at a couple different law firms. And, I fictionalized some things just because I didn't want to get sued. But the stories in it are really true. I mean, I describe my experiences working on these really big cases and being locked up in a warehouse all weekend long looking through documents. It was a pretty miserable life. And I taught law students until pretty recently as well. And I would hear these horror stories about young associates being told on a Friday afternoon to go get themselves a suit because they're going to, to some city in the Midwest for the weekend where they're going to have to review documents, and, they really are kind of treated as very, very high paid wage slaves. And, there's a lot of unhappiness among young lawyers. It's kind of ironic because especially at the big corporate firms, they make so much money, and yet, that money is not making them happy. And I think a lot of them really question their decisions to go that route. So my book, Double Billing, was about my own 3 years kind of following that same path before I got out and got a job, actually my first really good job at the CBS as a media lawyer. And, things got better from there. But those beginning years are tough ones.
Okay. So, on a recent episode, one thing that John and I were talking about was, I found this superhero role-playing book I used to play, and there's a note at the beginning, and the guy says, the word superhero is a trademark of Marvel and DC, and so I can't use it in this book. And we were just wondering, is that actually, apparently they do have a trademark, but is that true that you just can't use the word at all in the entire book if there's a trademark on it? And what are some of the issues with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would be, look, people try to trademark everything, and sometimes they do, but the trademark has to be very specific and limited to a particular type of use. I'd be surprised if the word superhero could be trademarked such that nobody else can use it. The question that a court's always going to ask is, is it confusing to the public? Will the public think that, if you're using the term superhero, that you must be somehow sponsored or endorsed or connected with Marvel? And I really don't, in that particular situation, I really don't think that's the case. I was involved in a case at CBS where Don Imus got a letter from the Chrysler Corporation because he had used the word Jeep in his book, and he'd used it without the the registered trademark symbol. And Chrysler sent him a letter telling him that Jeep was a registered trademark, and that if he was going to use it, he needed to identify it as such. And he went off on the air. It actually led to a libel suit because on the air he quite graphically described how he felt about the letter writer. But I think that was a silly kind of letter. I don't think the word Jeep is too generic really to be trademarked. I mean, somebody may have a trademark in it, but good luck trying to protect it.
So you also wrote a book called Dinner with Dad about being a parent. How has being a parent affected your writing, and how do you balance the two?
Well, it's made the time to write a lot more limited. But that book was kind of born out of feeling like I was getting disconnected from my kids and my family because I really was kind of burning the candle at many different ends. I was working several different jobs. I had a 2-hour commute to Manhattan, and I just realized, my kids are getting older quickly and they're going to be gone before I know it. And I really wanted a way to force myself to get home and be home. And so I just decided I would do this project where I would be at home and cook dinner for my kids and my wife, at least 4 or 5 days a week. And that just turned into that book, which I think was a great experience, not just the writing of the book, but actually the experience of doing it. I have to say it's kind of a thrill to have kids and go back and read the stuff that you read as a kid that they are now reading. Like my son was reading Catcher in the Rye, he was reading To Kill a Mockingbird, and I gave him some of the old Kurt Vonnegut books that I used to like, and it's just great to kind of rediscover those books as an adult and realize, how great they were. And, maybe you read Catcher in the Rye when you were 16, but, you really should go back and read it when you're 40 because you'll have a completely different perspective on it.
Yes, for decades now, I've heard people say that ebooks will never catch on because people are just too attached to the smell and feel of paper. But in an interview, I heard you say that your daughter is actually more comfortable with an e-reader. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, that's an amazing thing. My son has always been a pretty good reader, but my daughter, who's actually a pretty academic kid, she does well in school, but she does not like to read. And I don't know. I just, she was talking about a Kindle, and so I said, would you like the Kindle? And she said yes. And the first thing she did was she read about 8 books in 5 days on the Kindle. And, I think there's just a different way of absorbing literature and books that the new generation is more comfortable with. The screen for them, maybe not for everybody, but the screen for them is just the way that information gets processed, the same way that, like, when I was in college, we had to make the transition from writing on a yellow pad to writing on a computer. They're now making it from reading in a physical form to reading on a screen, and I think they're just much more comfortable with the screen.
So you talked a little bit about this earlier, but what do you make of the fact that so much young adult science fiction these days is so apprehensive about the future?
I think because we live in a kind of an apprehensive time. I think you'd have to sort of go back to, I think there was a similar feeling, sort of like in the early 50s when a lot of good science fiction was written, because people were really worried about the world. They were worried about nuclear annihilation. They were worried about, the beginnings of the Cold War. And I think a lot of those concerns were manifested in fiction, and particularly in science fiction. And, now in the wake of, September 11th and all the upheavals that are happening, in the Middle East and across the rest of the world, I think people, and especially young people, are apprehensive about what the future will bring. And I think they want to read and people want to write about, scary, plausible scenarios, both as a way of kind of maybe exorcising those demons, but also as a way of, sending out the warning signals.
Have you read any of the other sort of dystopian YA novels that have come out recently, and sort of what did you think of them?
Yeah, I love The Hunger Games, although I didn't like the third one, but I did like those books. I've read the Uglies and Pretties trilogy, which I've really liked. And like I say, the Tripods trilogy, The White Mountains, that's, again, great young adult dystopian fiction. Feed actually is one of my favorite books. Have you read Feed by M.T. Anderson?
Mm-mm.
That's a great book. That's like a future world in which basically like the internet is almost sort of implanted in people's brains, and they get these advertising messages fed right across their brains. Really, really cool. Like I say, I try to read a lot of YA, and I try to read a lot of dystopian stuff. So when I hear about it, I read it. If you've got any good suggestions, I'd be happy to pick up a few books.
I was going to mention Shipbreaker by Paolo Bacigalupi. Shipbreaker, it was a finalist for the National Book Award or something like that. And it just won it won the Prins Award is what it won. It won that. And, he has an adult novel called The Wind-Up Girl, which is also dystopian, and it won like every award, like won the Hugo, the Nebula, and all that. So, he's definitely somebody to look at too. But although his adult book is definitely an adult, it's not for younger readers. It's pretty brutal.
Really? Yeah. That's so funny, because actually I have a librarian friend here in Westport who I've read at the library, and she also recommended Shipbreaker, and actually it's on hold for me now at the Westport Public Library. I need to go pick it up, and I'm looking forward to reading it.
Okay, so are there any other new or upcoming projects you'd like to mention that we didn't talk about?
Well, I'm working on two things right now. One is an adult nonfiction book. It's about the running boom in the 1970s. So I'm kind of writing about this period in U.S. history when running was kind of taking off and really popular, and some of my boyhood idols like Bill Rogers and Frank Shorter and Alberto Salazar were kind of the kings of the road, and that's been a lot of fun. I'm kind of about halfway through that, and then I've sort of been tinkering around with another book that I'm calling 91 right now. It's another YA book that's it's really about the end of the universe. So just taking on a very big theme. It's about it's about the nature of time and matter and the end of the universe.
Are you considering a sequel to Water Wars? I thought I heard maybe something about that.
Yeah, I am. I definitely am. A lot of this stuff is really just a pure business economic decision. I'd be happy to write a sequel. I have a couple ideas too for both a prequel and a sequel. I mean, I kind of envision the second book taking place in one of the ruined cities like New York City, and I already have a couple characters in mind, but a lot of it is a function of how many copies of the Water Wars they sell and whether they think it's worth bringing out a second book, and whether they want me to write it. So I hope they do, and I hope the book does well enough that they'll ask me to, because I'd like to. So we'll see. Fingers crossed on that.
All right, well, Cameron Stracher, thanks so much for joining us on Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And that was our interview. So thanks so much to Cameron Stracher for joining us on the show. All right, and so, the first thing I think we're going to talk about is I have to correct something that was said during the interview. More specifically, something John said during the interview. But John, you referred to Waterworld as one of the biggest box office bombs of all time.
Mm-hmm.
But here's what I found on Wikipedia.
Oh, okay.
They say, the movie debuted at the box office at number 1. Problems encountered during filming led to a massive budget overrun, and it held the dubious distinction of being the most expensive film ever made at the time. Some critics dubbed it Fish Star and Kevin's Gate, references to the notorious flops Ishtar and Heaven's Gate. With a budget of $175 million, the film grossed a mere $88 million at the U.S. box office, which seemed to make it the all-time box office bomb. The film, however, did much better overseas, with $176 million at the foreign box office, and good VHS and later DVD sales, giving the movie over $100 million in profit.
I see. Okay, well, I apologize to Waterworld. Well, obviously, what I was remembering was the fact that it was, it was one of the most expensive movies ever made, and it didn't do well domestically. I guess I didn't know about the foreign box office and whatnot.
Yeah, no, I mean, neither did I. I mean, I just came across that. But yeah, certainly everyone remembers Waterworld as this huge bomb. But so that's why it kind of stuck in my memory when I read that. But I feel like Waterworld gets kind of a bad rap. I mean, I haven't seen it since it first came out, but I sort of remember it being sort of an average post-apocalyptic movie. I don't remember it being the worst thing ever.
Yeah, I think it gets a little bit of a bad rap too. I mean, it's not good, but I mean, it's not as bad as some people make it out to be. I mean, there are parts of it that are certainly entertaining, and there's parts of it that are, it does some things that I've never seen in science fiction films before, or certainly hadn't at the time.
I just remember when I saw it in the theater, it starts out and there's the globe. It's the logo of the, movie studio. And then, you just see the globe and you don't even really notice at first, but the water levels are rising and the oceans are, submerging all the land on the earth. That was kind of a cool way to start out the movie. I just remember sort of the ripple that went through the audience when people noticed that the logo was doing that.
Yeah.
All right. But so speaking of dystopian fiction, we're going to start out by talking about John's new anthology, Brave New Worlds, which collects, the best of dystopian short stories. So, yeah, first of all, why don't we just start out and could you talk a little bit about just what is dystopian fiction?
So, I mean, dystopian fiction is basically just fiction that takes place in an unfavorable society in which to live. A lot of people sort of think like dystopia is a synonym for post-apocalyptic, but it's not. And I mean, it's not a synonym for bleak or just a darkly imagined future. I mean, in the dystopian story, society itself is like the antagonist. And so that's kind of one of the things that makes it funny to me that people often use dystopian as a synonym for post-apocalyptic, because it's like, well, in post-apocalyptic fiction, it's like, well, you've destroyed civilization. It's like you have to have civilization in place in order for there to be a dystopia. The Lottery by Shirley Jackson is sort of a classic example that that's included in the anthology. And of course, Brave New Worlds, which the book is named after, is a classic example, as is 1984.
Well, I mean, speaking of The Lottery, actually, I came across this kind of interesting quote from Shirley Jackson about that. So she says, of the 300-odd letters that I received that summer, this is the summer that the story was published, I can count only 13 that spoke kindly to me, and they were mostly from friends. Even my mother scolded me, quote, "Dad and I did not care at all for your story in The New Yorker," she wrote sternly. "It does seem, dear, that this gloomy kind of story is what all you young people think about these days. Why don't you write something to cheer people up?" So, John, why don't you edit an anthology to cheer people up? What's wrong with you young people these days?
Yeah, I don't know. Actually, I'd heard that that the initial reaction to The Lottery was all very negative. Well, actually, if you want a story, if you want an anthology that is sort of intended to cheer you up, Yetzi DeVry actually edited an anthology called Shine, which is specifically supposed to be utopian, or at least positive, maybe not utopian, but like positive futures, in all the stories. In a way, kind of the opposite of Brave New Worlds, but I mean, that's actually one of the interesting things, too, though, speaking of utopias, is that in dystopian fiction, the societies that are depicted are often depicted as utopias, or at least the citizens who are living there sometimes think they're in utopias, whereas like when we're looking at it from the outside, we can obviously see, oh, well, this is actually a dystopia, at least it is to us.
Why do you think that there's so much confusion about what the word dystopia means?
Yeah, I mean, like dystopian fiction is kind of hot right now, especially like in YA and young adult fiction, and so a lot of books are being sort of labeled with dystopian, and so I think part of the confusion is just that people sort of latch on to this word that they think is like a hot genre, and so they're eager to apply it to whatever is coming out, so that because, oh well, dystopian's hot, let's call this dystopian, and without really understanding what it is about the stories that qualifies it to be termed a dystopia. And so I think that's part of where the confusion comes in. It's just marketing. Mm-hmm. I think it's just a term that a lot of people aren't familiar with. It's like, I mean, I think most people know, like, oh, dystopia, that's like 1984 or Brave New World, but they don't understand what it is about those books that makes it dystopia, or makes the genre dystopian, It's like they think like, oh, well, it's just like sort of dark science fiction or dark.
But I mean, so you can sort of understand why people would sort of get confused and kind of think dystopia and sort of post-apocalyptic or massive ecological collapse sort of go together, because they go together so often, and so often, the massive ecological collapse is what sort of creates the grounds for the dystopian government to sort of come into existence.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that the two would be conflated, and I mean, obviously, I did an anthology called Wastelands, which is specifically about post-apocalyptic fiction, and then now I did Brave New Worlds. So I've done a lot of thinking about these two, and they seem very clear. There's very clear distinctions in my mind, which, where the line is. But, I mean, obviously though, like all of my books, like Wastelands and Brave New Worlds are probably the closest connected. I mean, they're obviously there's a lot of overlap in the readers who read Wastelands. A lot of them will also, want to read Brave New Worlds just because of that connection.
When you start putting together an anthology like this, you must have thought, like, there are a certain set of stories that I just absolutely have to have. Like, it can't be this kind of anthology I want without these sort of core stories. Like, what were the core stories?
The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, certainly one. The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula K. Le Guin. There's The Pedestrian by Ray Bradbury. Repent, Harlequin Said the TikTok Man by Harlan Ellison. The Minority Report by Philip K. Dick. Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. So those are all like real classics. I mean, maybe I'd also throw in Millennium by J.G. Ballard. I mean, to me, like, Ballard is really an important figure in dystopian fiction. Like, I don't know that he was as essential as these others, just because he's not as well known, at least not to American audiences. Added to those classics there, I would also throw in, Paolo Bacigalupi, just like, it's like, well, you clearly have to have a Paolo Bacigalupi story in this book. And so I do. I have his story Pop Squad. But did I also say The Pedestrian by Ray Bradbury?
Yeah, because you mentioned that. Yeah, actually, I mean, speaking of Bradbury, I mean, you had to have a Bradbury story.
Sure.
But weren't you sort of going back and forth on which Bradbury to use for a while?
Yeah, so I guess it wasn't so much that The Pedestrian had to be in there, but Ray Bradbury had to be. I mean, The Pedestrian's a classic story of his, certainly, and it certainly fits the book, and so, I did end up using it. I was debating, or I wanted to use The Fireman, which was the first sort of version of Fahrenheit 451 that Ray Bradbury wrote. And of course, I hadn't mentioned that yet. I mean, I mentioned Brave New World in 1984. I mean, obviously, Fahrenheit 451 is the other, in the sort of trifecta of classic science fiction, dystopian science fiction novels. But so The Fireman was sort of the original version of that story that Bradbury had written, and it's a novella. And unfortunately, I couldn't get the rights to that. If you want to read it in that original form, I mean, it is, if you've read Fahrenheit 451, I mean, to a large extent, it's not really urgent to read it because you've basically read the story already. I mean, if you're a scholar, you might want to read it for, just to see the differences, to see how it evolved into the story it became in Fahrenheit 451. But if you do want to read it, Subterranean Press actually issued a short collection of Bradbury's works, which includes The Fireman. I'm not sure of the name of it. It may actually just be called The Fireman. But they recently reissued it, and so so I couldn't get the rights to republish it again. But if we had done it right after Wastelands, I probably wouldn't have been able to get it. So I was a little disappointed there. But The Pedestrian's also a great story, so I'm just as happy to have it in there. And it's only like 2,000 words, so it's like I was able to include more other stories since I didn't include The Fireman. So maybe worked out better in the end. Yeah, so that just reminds me, Kim Stanley Robinson actually has a trilogy. It's called the Three Californias trilogy. So the first book, The Wild Shore, is a great post-apocalyptic novel. And the second novel sort of takes place after that, but it's like after they've rebuilt society, but the society they've rebuilt is dystopian. And so you have that progression from post-apocalyptic society where society is destroyed to society's been rebuilt, but you have a dystopian society. And then the third book, Pacific Edge, depicts a utopia. And so you sort of have the whole entire evolution of those types of societies in science fiction within this one trilogy.
Out of all the stories, did the dystopian societies, do they all come across as sort of equally bad, or do any of them stand out as being particularly awful?
Pop Squad. That certainly seems like one of the most horrific to live in. Maybe not for everyone, but certainly for anyone who has children would be heavily affected by it. I mean, and that's a story in which they've society or scientists have discovered a way they've discovered a drug that allows your body to remain immortal, basically. And in order to keep the world from being overpopulated, it's like you can't just have a child whenever you want. And so there's an organization, sort of tasked with eliminating these children. And so the protagonist is on the, quote unquote pop squad. And it's his job to go, find illicit children and kill them. So, I mean, that's pretty dark. But let's see, the most horrible to live, the most horrible to live in one is probably The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. If you're that one kid. But I don't want to say more because that kind of gives away the story. But yeah, and I don't know, like personally, I think the Minority Report would be pretty awful too. Just like that's a pretty famous story, and there's been a movie made about it, so a lot of people probably are familiar with it. But I mean, that's a case where they have precognition, and the police use it to prevent. They use the precognition to stop criminals from enacting the crimes before they even actually start to do them, so it's like if you just think of doing a crime, like they'll arrest you, so like the literal thought police, right? I mean, it's like the thought of being able to be arrested for just having a thought is like pretty chilling and seems about the worst kind of society you could ever live in, right? Yeah, it would be so hard to even conceive of how you could possibly get by in a society like that. I mean, admittedly, there are other stories in which the day-to-day life is probably worse, like where, maybe they're struggling more. But I mean, just the not even being able to have the freedom of thought just seems like, the hardest thing to probably put up with.
Well, I think that's an interesting issue, this issue of like how many of these dystopian societies that are depicted in fiction are actually workable in real life. Would they just not collapse from the amount of stress they would put on the populations? Like what would you say is sort of the connection between dystopia and satire? Because it seems like almost all dystopias I can think of are satires in some way or another, that they take some societal trend and exaggerate it to a really not really believable extent, but just to make that kind of point.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly some element of satire in probably most, if not all, dystopian fiction. I mean, when you said that, it just made me think immediately of Robocop, which is a great dystopian movie. I mean, it's obviously very satirical, and obviously sort of doing exactly what you're saying is exaggerating a trend to in a sort of an illogical extreme.
Like, to take a story from the book, I mean, like, you mentioned Kurt Vonnegut's Harrison Bergeron, which is just, I mean, it's just absolutely, I mean, it's a fantastic story, but it's just absolutely ridiculous society where, they've tried to promote equality by handicapping everybody who's exceptional. So if you're good looking, you have to wear an ugly mask. And if you're strong, you have to wear heavy weights and stuff like that. And I mean, obviously, it's very hard to imagine something like that actually happening. And a lot of these dystopian stories, I mean, they are sort of didactic in a way. They're sort of they have sort of an explicit sort of political message or something. When you read commentary online, whenever there's a story that kind of makes a point, there's a certain number of people will complain about, how, the story shouldn't be making a point, or it shouldn't be, quote unquote, hitting people over the head with a message and stuff like that. And I don't know, this strikes me as a little odd, that there's just this presumption that making a point and doing so clearly and unapologetically is bad, is sort of by definition bad. When you think about how many stories have done that we consider classics, I mean, you just think about stories like Candide by Voltaire, or A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift, or Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Huckleberry Finn. I mean, none of these stories are really subtle about the message that they're trying to get across. So I just wonder, where does this idea come from that stories shouldn't have a message, or should at least, camouflage it to an extent where you don't really notice it?
The frequency with people complain about that online and elsewhere, I guess, is just seems a bit odd to me. It's like there's no, it's like I think some people are just really sensitive to that kind of thing happening in their fiction, and like a lot of people, they don't really want to think when they're reading fiction. They just want to sort of turn off their brain and get some entertainment, and these stories that dare to try to make some point about something might actually make you stop and think about it for a while, and so that's sort of disturbing to some people, and that's why they sort of lash out against it. And I mean, I think that's sad, because I mean, it sort of discourages people from trying to tell stories that try to make some sort of point. Since you're in The Living Dead, I mean, you've watched the reviews with some close. You've watched the reviews fairly closely, as I have, and several readers have complained about that being too overtly political. It's like, I mean, I think there's 5 stories in the book that have overt political messages in them, but it's like, really, I mean, that's enough to like really upset you that much. I mean, that any of these stories dare to comment on anything, which is so ironic to complain about in a zombie story, given that George Romero's zombie movies, which launched all of this stuff, all of the whole zombie genre, all of those movies are explicitly, making political statements.
The example, that I've always used sort of on this is that there was this, you mentioned Minority Report. There's this other dystopian Philip K. Dick story called The Pre-Persons. And it's this very, I mean, there's nothing subtle about it. It's this very overt anti-abortion story where society has sort of decided that people don't become, that children shouldn't be considered human beings until they're old enough that they can sort of do algebra, that's sort of the point of development at which we're going to start defining the beginning of life. And so children who are younger than that, they kind of have to be careful, because there are these kind of like dog catcher like trucks that sort of go around euthanizing children who are younger than that. And I remember when I first read that story, it just made me so angry. It makes you angry and it makes you think. And I still remember that story so vividly, so many years later, whereas so many other stories, that were probably more subtle and understated, I've completely forgotten. They never really made much of an impression on me. And I've just never, I've always been sort of just fascinated by stories that kind of make you angry and that make you think and that make you want to come up with a response. And I actually did, when I read that story, I wrote a response story, which never was published, because shortly after I wrote it, I read James Morrow's story "Auspicious Eggs," which actually appears in this book, which is essentially, it's the same basic idea that I had. And I don't know if he wrote this as a response to the Pre-Persons or not, but it sort of takes the opposite tack, that it's a society in which the sort of prioritization of the unborn has reached such extremes that people are just forced to not waste any sperm and to just try to produce as many children as they can by any means necessary, and this is all sort of enforced by the authorities and stuff like that. And I think it's just those stories, reading those stories together, I think is really an interesting exercise. And I'm just always really glad that stories like that exist. And I think, the right response when a story makes you angry is not to hate the story or hate the author, but to write your own response and sort of use art to advance the conversation.
Word. I would actually just throw in something there on the same topic. But I mean, speaking of the rights of the unborn and whatnot, there's actually another story I published called RVs by Adam Troy Castro. It's not really dystopian. I mean, it's sort of feels somewhat dystopian, but I felt like it wasn't dystopian enough to be in the book. But it appeared in Lightspeed magazine, and it's actually it's a finalist for the Nebula Award this year. Well, basically, RVs, it's sort of a play on the word RV, like recreation or vehicle. I mean, in this, basically people have, retreated literally to the womb, and they live their entire lives basically inside the womb, using human hosts as like RVs. And I don't know, it's really hard to explain, but I mean, it's really audacious and daring, and I really highly recommend it.
I mean, just when you think about the classics of dystopian literature, 1984, Brave New World, Fahrenheit 451, these are all things that are they get assigned to everybody in school, whereas, other types of science fiction generally aren't. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you have any thoughts about why dystopian fiction is such an easy sell to schools?
Well, I mean, I think like post-apocalyptic fiction, dystopian fiction is also very easy for sort of lay people, not familiar with the genre, to sort of pick up and get what's happening here. It's like, okay, yeah, I see what you're doing there. It's like it's not too hard to grok, as it were. But also because these dystopian books, I mean, they're because they're about these real issues, like we were talking about. I mean, they really have points to make. That provides a lot of discussion for English class. You know what I mean? It's like it gives the teacher a lot to talk about with the students, and really sort of demonstrates the power of prose. I mean, it's like not only are you telling this story, you're also communicating all these other things. And, what does the author mean by doing this and this and this? And, I mean, the educational applications for those books are quite vast. Although, it's interesting you say how they're assigned to everyone. You know what? I was really disappointed in my schooling. Like I was assigned Fahrenheit 451 and Brave New World, but I was never assigned 1984. So I was really surprised, so I didn't read it until later in life. And I mean, it's an amazing book. I mean, all three are. Although I haven't actually read Brave New World as an adult. I only read it as a teenager. And Fahrenheit 451 was an interesting example. That was an example where I was assigned to read it, and I couldn't really get into it because it was an assignment, And we've talked about this on the show before, how these assignments often ruin books for kids. But I later read it as an adult and thought it was brilliant, and it's one of my favorite books now. But
I mean, have you heard it? Has your anthology, Brave New Worlds, has that been used in schools at all? Or did you think when you were putting it together about whether it would make a good textbook or anything like that?
I mean, I didn't pick any of the stories specifically thinking like this will be a textbook. I did think that once I put it together that the volume probably would be useful as a text. I mean, mainly because Wastelands and The Living Dead had both been picked up as textbooks in various classes. I know Joe Haldeman used Wastelands at MIT. And there have been other colleges that have used Wastelands as well. And there was there are several zombie courses actually out there now, and several of them have used The Living Dead. So, I mean, it was certainly on my mind that the book might be used as a text. And the fact is that there's like no anthology like this. I mean, strange as it may seem, I mean, all the great history of dystopian fiction, all the great works that have been published, I mean, as far as I could tell, I mean, no one had ever sort of collected all of the best or attempted to collect all of the best in one volume, and, whether or not they actually are the best is obviously up for debate. I mean, they're what I thought were the best.
When you were talking before about Fahrenheit 451, I think that was back in episode 2 when we interviewed Paolo Bacigalupi. And I think we had a whole lot to say about our thoughts about schooling and the role of books in school. back then. So if anyone's interested in that subject, definitely, and you want to know our thoughts on the subject, definitely go check out that episode. Dystopias, it's not just in the future, even like things today, societies today, we would probably regard as dystopian societies. And the most obvious example of that would be North Korea. I've heard Christopher Hitchens say, he's been to North Korea, and he says, that it's really as if someone had read George Orwell's 1984 and said, like, could you actually do this? Could you put this into practice? That's sort of what it's like. And of course, it's very hard to get information about what's going on in North Korea, which is why I was so fascinated by this recent documentary that came out. It's called State of Mind. And this sort of documentary crew went into North Korea to cover these spectacles that they have there. Did you get a chance to watch this, John?
No.
But in North Korea, they have these events called mass games, where they're just these enormous spectacles with, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of people all synchronized and running around, and there's gymnastics and flag waving and dancing and stuff, throwing balls around, and you just cannot believe the scale of this. So they sort of show what the living conditions are like, and in the sort of apartment, people live in these kind of big apartment buildings, and the government propaganda is, piped in all the time. There's really no selection of channels, and you can't even turn it. You can sort of turn the volume down, but you can't turn it off. It's never not playing. And so it sort of follows these two kind of teenage girls who are just killing themselves trying to prepare for this event. And it's a big honor, to be selected to participate in one of these mass games. And injury, they're working through injuries. They're working all day long. They're skipping school and stuff. All just hoping that the great leader, Kim Jong-il, will show up and watch them. And then in the end, they put on 16 days or something of this show, and Kim Jong-il never shows up. And the day after it's over, they start preparing for the next one, and nobody knows when the next one will be. And the people, they all seem really nice, and they just, they're hanging out with their families and hanging out with their friends and stuff, and they all seem very nice. And then just every once in a while, somebody will say something just really bizarre, some just sort of weird conspiracy theory type thing that they've been told by the government propaganda. And it's really unsettling in those moments when these people that you've kind of just sort of gotten to like will just suddenly say something just so out there.
Yeah, well, it certainly does sound like 1984 come to life. And so if you're interested in more of a discussion about dystopian movies, if you check out episode 18, our episode featuring Eric Garcia, who wrote the book that the movie Repo Man was based on, which is a dystopian movie. And in that episode, we talked about The Running Man, Robocop, and Total Recall in pretty great detail. So if you're interested in hearing more of a discussion about dystopian films, you might want to check out that episode. And just had to mention that because The Running Man is one of my favorite movies as well, and it is a great dystopian film.
All right, so I think we're just about out of time. If you listened last week, you know that we're now sponsored by Audible.com, which is the largest provider of audiobooks. John and I have been subscribers for years and years, and both have listened to hundreds, or at least over 100 audiobooks from them. And so how it works is if you go to our website at geeksguideshow.com and click on the ads for Audible, and if you sign up for a trial subscription, you'll get a free audiobook. And we'll get some money that'll help support the show. And so, if you want a suggestion for something you should listen to, you could go check out A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. I think that was the first thing I got from Audible. I think that was what sort of motivated me to sign up in the first place and get my subscription and everything, is because I really, really wanted that audiobook. And it's one of my favorite books, and everyone should listen to it anyway. If you haven't listened to our interview with George R.R. Martin, you should check that out. It's episode 22. But you should definitely read it or listen to it soon, because the Game of Thrones HBO series will be coming out on April 17th. So if you want to be ready for that, you can check out the book. And if you do it by going to geeksguideshow.com and click on the Audible ad and signing up there, you'll be helping us out a lot.
So that's one way you can support the show. If you would rather, you can go to iTunes and you can give us a review or a rating there. If you love the show, you can give us a 5-star rating, and if you want to write a little review, that would help. Also, post a comment here on IO9, and when IO9 sees that there's comments on the post, that shows them that you guys love us. So, if you want to support the show, or if you just want to say that you enjoyed the show, just drop a comment over on IO9. And so that was our episode, and thanks for listening.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of IO9. For this episode's show notes, to subscribe to this podcast, or for more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your hosts, visit johnjosephadams.com or davidbarkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by Slipgate 9 Entertainment. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.